Hey everybody, Tim Parrish here for the Huntington Church of Christ, and I welcome you back to this week's edition of Wednesdays in the Word. I was struggling with some personal issues, dealing with some church trouble many years ago, and I reached out to a dear friend and mentor of mine. I kind of wanted him to honor my complaints. I wanted him to make me feel better, and I wanted him to give me an answer or a solution to my problems. Instead, he gave me a CD containing 2 of his own sermons. He never really said much. He just said, take these and listen to them when you get the chance. Well, as luck would have it, one of the sermons was kind of inconsequential to what we were talking about. It was just one that I think he thought was a particularly good sermon. The other one, well, it grabbed hold of me. And I heard exactly what he needed me to hear in that sermon. Well, that's been on my mind a lot lately. I was cleaning off some things in my office, and I found the CD. That man has since gone on to be with Jesus, and yet I popped that CD into the CD player, and once again, I was back there as a younger preacher, sitting at this man's feet, listening to him remind me once again of some things that we all need to be reminded of from time to time. Well, that made me realize that maybe some of you could benefit from hearing about that as well. So today we're going to be studying from the book of Esther. The book of Esther takes place during the period of the Medo-Persian Empire. The Persians, of course, came in after the Babylonians, but before the Greeks. And during the time of the Persian Empire, we are introduced there to a king that our Bibles often refer to as Ahasuerus. History records his name as Xerxes, but we're talking about the same character. Xerxes is not particularly remembered as a great king. In fact, one of the things that is often said historically about Xerxes is that he couldn't make a decision on his own. It's almost as if he was afraid to think through something and make a decision. And so he surrounded himself with advisors, and while it's not always bad to use advisors, if you're going to be a king, especially a powerful one like he was, it would be good to be able to make a decision. Well, one of the things the king did not struggle with was self-confidence. He was phenomenally wealthy. His empire was quite large. And one of the things that kings used to do in order to display their wealth was to purchase things of precious metal, or have things made of gold and silver, or fine fabrics and those kinds of things. And so he decided it was time for him to show off his massive wealth accumulation to all the important people in the kingdom. Now, there were 127 different provinces in the kingdom, and each one of those had a prince. And so Ahasuerus throws this big party, and he invites all of those 127 princes to come. And they come so that they can see the fine linen curtains that he's hung on the walls, the tapestries, to gaze at the silver curtain rings that he's used to hang them, to see the golden objects that are everywhere, and to feast. This was such a big party that it went on for 6 months. 6 months. Well, at the end of 6 months, this wasn't enough to satisfy Ahasuerus with what everybody thought about him. And so he decided to open this thing up to the entire province, to any citizen of his kingdom, to come and gaze and gawk and feast and drink and celebrate. In fact, his wealth was so great that when the entire kingdom was invited to come in, he served their drinks in golden goblets. Well, after a period of feasting, on one particular night when probably most of the men involved in this story were intoxicated, King Ahasuerus decides he's going to show them the greatest treasure in his kingdom, something they've not gazed upon before. And so he sends for his wife, Vashti. And he wants her to come and display herself. Now, you can perhaps use your imagination as to exactly what he had in mind. The Bible doesn't give us that detail, only that he wanted her to come and do this. But Vashti had enough self-respect that she said, I will not come. I will not display myself in front of all these drunken men. Well, the king was embarrassed. He didn't know what to do. And so he turned to his advisors and he said, what should I do about this? And they said, are you kidding? You got to handle her. Because if word gets out that you told your wife, the queen, to do something and she didn't do it, then what do you think it's going to be like for us? All our wives will stop doing what we tell them to do if this gets out. So you can't let her get away with it. Well, not knowing what else to do, he deposes her from the throne and she disappears. I don't know what happened to her. She just goes away. And thus begins the search for the next queen. Well, as this kind of starts to take place, we're introduced to a character in the book of Esther named Mordecai. And Mordecai is a man of some importance. He is a Jewish man, obviously, a descendant of the tribe of Benjamin. But Mordecai has achieved some importance. He is a man who sits in the city gates. Now, that doesn't just mean that Mordecai is a guy who sits around whittling or like it would be at the coffee shop. Mordecai is a man to whom people can come when they have problems or disputes, and he's kind of an official city advisor or a city councilman, something like that. And so he is well known and again of some prominence or some importance. He is raising his relative of some kind. We're not sure if she was his niece or his cousin. Her name is Hadassah, but we know her better by the name Esther. And really all we know is that her parents died. We think from the language that Hadassah's dad was his uncle, Mordecai's uncle, so she would have been something like his cousin. But he had raised her as his own daughter. Now, the reason these two stories converge, the reason Mordecai emerges as a character around the same time we meet Esther, is because of the search for a new queen. You see, the king sends out his people into every province and has the most beautiful women selected from all over the kingdom and brought in. Maybe one per province, maybe two or three. We don't know exactly how many. But they come into the king's palace and they spend a year in preparation for meeting the king. Their one night, their chance to maybe win his heart and become the next queen. Now, these women are not really brought of their own volition. Every indication is that they didn't really have a choice. The king says, go get me these women, and when the king's people get there, you go. It's just what you do. And so one of the women that's chosen is Hadassah. Now, Mordecai says, listen, I don't know if it'll ever come up, but probably you shouldn't tell your family history. Don't talk about your ethnicity. Don't talk about the fact that you are a Jew who came into this place as a captive from the previous ruling country. Just leave that alone. And it shouldn't come up, but don't tell anybody. So she agreed to not tell anybody. Well, after a year, and the year was there because it's not like there was a local clinic where they could go have blood tests or other tests to determine that the women were disease-free. After a year, they kind of had a pretty good feel for the physical health, the mental fitness, as well as the beauty. In fact, one of the things that's mentioned there is that they went through beauty treatments over this period of time. And so at the end of 1 year, this process begins where night after night, a woman is selected, and she goes in for a night with the king. And then she is sent back to the harem, and he brings in the next young woman. When he gets to Esther, he stops the search. He doesn't need to look any farther. She so pleased him that he said, this is the new queen. And everyone else would stay in the king's harem. They would all be considered wives of the king, but they wouldn't be the queen, only one queen. And now Esther has taken the place of Hadassah. Now, as you read through the book of Esther, the next thing you find is that Mordecai actually uncovers a plot to kill the king. Big Than and Teresh were kind of like Secret Service agents. And Mordecai found out that they wanted to kill Ahasuerus. He sends word up through the chain of command. Those guys are brought and hanged. And Mordecai's story is written down in the king's chronicles, the notes, the official notes that the king would keep. So file that away. That's going to become important just a little bit later. Well, things are going along okay, and we're introduced to a man named Haman. Now, Haman has been promoted into a really high position of authority under King Ahasuerus. But Haman is a man who has let that authority become a source of great pride, and that pride has gone to his head. And it's become kind of the normal practice that whenever he comes around with his entourage, everybody has to bow down and pay homage to Mordecai, or to Haman rather. The only problem is Mordecai won't. Now, he may be many things, but he is not a man who will bow down to someone who is just another man. Well, this enrages Haman. And he tries to figure out what he's going to do. And he talks to his best friends, and he says, what are we going to do? And they say, well, you got to kill him. And he said, but I don't want to just kill him. I know he's one of those dirty old Jews, and I want to kill them all. I want to send a message that you don't mess with Haman. And so I'm going to kill every Jew. So Haman goes into the king, and he spins this tale about this group of people that refuse to obey the laws and refuse to do what they're supposed to and cause a lot of problems. And he convinces King Ahasuerus to kill all the Jews, or to allow the Jews to be attacked and exterminated on a determined day. The king signs it into law. He again, doesn't make many decisions for himself. It doesn't take much to convince him. The only problem that this now creates is his queen is a Jew. Well, word gets back to the queen through Mordecai that this is the thing that's going on. All the Jews in every place in the kingdom are wearing sackcloth and ashes, and they're mourning and they're fasting. And Esther comes to meet with Mordecai. And he says, listen, the only chance we've got is if you go talk to the king and do something about this. And she said, you don't understand. I may be the queen, but you don't just walk in and see the king. If you're not invited and you go in and he does not extend the royal scepter to you, they just kill you right there on the spot. And we come to that particular verse that we enjoy so well and we've used so very often, to the place where Haman or Mordecai says to Esther, maybe this is the very purpose that you are in the position you're in. Maybe this is all working the way it is for just such a time as this. Well, she begins to decide what to do, and she tells Mordecai, y'all keep praying and fast and tell every Jew you know to be praying about this, because we can't take any chances that this doesn't go well. So as time goes on, finally she decides she will approach the king. She goes and she stands before King Ahasuerus, and he extends the golden scepter. She says, listen, I think we need to have a banquet. We need to have dinner. And would you just invite Haman to this dinner? So the king immediately makes it happen. Yes, tells all his advisors, go find Haman, bring him in here. We're going to have dinner, me and the queen and Haman. I don't know what this is about, but it's what she wants. Well, she doesn't say anything. I don't know if she loses her nerve or if this is her plan all along. They have dinner and they go home. Well, this just further inflates the ego of Haman. And he's still trying to figure out what is he going to do with Mordecai. And his wife says, you know what, why don't you just go ahead and hang him? Just build a gallows and hang him. Because he ought to see that you are everything that I believe you are. And how dare he not bow to you? So he gets his guys together and they start building a 50-foot high scaffold in the courtyard of the palace. This is going to be a big time hanging. Well, the king has trouble sleeping one night, and so he says, bring me the book of the Chronicles, the important things that have happened, and read me some of my own history, which is maybe a little bit arrogant, but we'll let that slide for now because it plays into the story. And where they turn to in the Chronicles, among the other things that they read to him, is about the time that Mordecai uncovered the murder plot. And so he says, you know what? I never did anything to honor that guy. What could I do? What could I do? And so he says, I hear some noise in the courtyard. Who's out there? They said, well, it's Haman. He said, have Haman come in here. So Haman comes in and he says, listen, what would you do if you wanted to honor, if I, the king, wanted to really honor somebody? What do you think I ought to do? Well, of course, this is playing right into Haman's ego. And one of the things that he immediately does is he kind of turns this over in his mind, and he decides that he's going to ask for everything that he would want for himself. Because in his mind, surely the king is talking about him. There's nobody else that he could want to honor in this way. And so he says, here's what I think I would do. That the man who the king desires to honor, let him bring a royal robe that the king has worn, and the horse on which the king has ridden, and on whose head a royal crown has been placed. And let the robe and the horse be handed over to one of the king's most noble princes, and let them array the man whom the king desires to honor, and lead him on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, thus it shall be done to the man whom the king desires to honor. So then comes what you and I might call the punchline. Or surely it must have felt like a punch to Mordecai. Because then Ahasuerus says, then take the robe and the horse, all the things you just described, and you, as one of my most trusted princes, you go do that for Mordecai. Oh man, he did it. He found Mordecai, he put the robe on him, he put him on the royal horse, and he leads him through the street and says, this is what the king wants to do to honor somebody. And then the Bible says he covers his head and he goes home. You can imagine, literally, he was ashamed, he was embarrassed. Well, he goes home to his wife and he's complaining about this. And his wife maybe advises him a little bit better this time than she did before. And she said, listen, if this thing is happening, this guy's a Jew, and you're trying to exterminate the Jews, and all this is going on the way it is, this is not going to end well for you. You got to know, this is not going to end well for you. Well, what does he do? He gets invited again to a second banquet with the king. And still, this kind of stokes the ego back up a little bit, and so he shows up to this banquet. He's a little unsure of what's going to happen, but still, he's the only one who's been invited to this banquet. Well, Esther sees this as her opportunity. And she says to the king, look, there is somebody who is trying to exterminate my people. I haven't really told you who I am, but there is someone who wants to kill all of my people, which would include me. And if it was just going to be that we were going to be sold off or sent somewhere as slaves, I wouldn't say anything. But this is different, and I've got to say something to you. And the king becomes furious because he loves this queen. He picked her out of all the women in the province, and he said, who would do such a thing as this? And she said, it's actually that guy, Haman. Well, the king decides right then, Haman must die for what he has done. And he begins to try to plead his case, Haman does, to Esther, to beg for mercy. And when the king looks back and Haman is over there begging for mercy, he thinks Haman is attempting to physically or sexually assault Queen Esther. And he says, no, take him out now and hang him on those gallows that he was building. Thus ends the life and the story of Haman. Well, the queen says, look, king, you got to do something to fix this. My people are designated to die on a certain day. What can you do? And he says, look, when the law is made, I can't rescind it. I can't change it. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my signet ring, the ring that he would press into the melted wax to seal the laws. He said, I'm going to give this to Haman, to Mordecai, and Mordecai can figure out what to do. I know Mordecai is a wise man. He will come up with a good solution to this problem. Well, Mordecai, knowing he can't actually change the law, decides to institute a new law that Jews who had formerly not been able to carry any kind of weapons could arm themselves, and when this attack came, they could fight back. And so the day came, 3 days in a row, when those who had been committed to this massacre decided to go on and carry it out. But as it's recorded for us, even though 3 days in a row, the 14th, the 15th, the 16th of that month, they attempted to kill the Jews, not one single Jew died. They armed themselves, they fought back, they defended themselves, and thus a beautiful ending to the story is that the Jews are preserved, and they're still there, of course, once we move through the next two empires and come all the way into the time of Jesus. They are preserved as a people of God. Now, there's a lot of lessons that I think we can take away from this particular story, the story of Esther. And I'm going to put some questions on here at the end, maybe to help further your story. And I want you to go back and I want you to read the book of Esther. We just kind of flew over the surface. I want you to go back and read. It's not a long read. You will notice as you do that the name of God does not appear anywhere in this book. And yet one of the most prominent things that comes out of this entire story is the providential working of God. How God is able to show up in any situation and use all kinds of things to his glory for the good of his people. I think that's one of the most important things that you can take away is that the providence of God is so real and is sometimes so unexplainable. In today's time, there are a lot of things that on the surface may appear to be coincidence that could in fact be the providential working of God, the hand of God in our lives. I can't always explain that. I can't always point to something and say, oh yeah, that was God. But sometimes it's easy to look at things and think, sure, that might have been, especially when we're looking back at the way things fell into place or the things that just lined up in our lives that turned out for the good of God's people. But I also want you to notice that just like in this day, so it is today. The arrogance, the ego, and the overinflated pride of people is as unchecked and vicious a thing as there is. It can cause you to lose all sense of right and wrong. It can cause you to think so much of yourself that you only think of yourself. There's no room to think of anyone else. And certainly that doesn't fit with what Jesus said about loving God and loving others, which requires you to think of others more than you think of yourself. Arrogance, pride, and ego, they're still out there, just like they were then. But the thing that my mentor wanted me to take away from this, and maybe the lesson that I needed to hear then the most, maybe the lesson that you need to hear today, is that not everybody in life is going to think about you what your mom and daddy think about you. Not everybody is going to think about you what your cousins think about you. Not everybody's going to think about you what your grandma says about you. They're not going to see you in the same way. They're not going to honor you. Not everybody is going to respect you. Not everybody's even going to like you. That is a harsh reality, but one we would do well to expect. And so rather than continuing to expect everybody to like me and to act in a way or behave in a way designed to keep people liking me, well, that's not the direction I need to go because not everybody is going to like me. But maybe equally important is that you can't let that one person or that group of people and their dislike of me cause me to destroy myself. That's exactly what happened to Haman. Haman had everything. He had everything. He was prominent. He was important. He had everybody in the kingdom bowing down to him, except one. That we know of, Mordecai is the only one. And he began to be so consumed with that one person and so enraged by that one person that it, well, in this case, literally cost him his life. Don't let that happen to you. Don't be so upset when you realize that somebody is not your big fan that it causes you to lose everything. One of the things that kind of comes as a side note, a postscript, is that in this story of Esther, the day that the Jews were going to be destroyed was determined by the casting of lots, or pur, P-U-R. And to this day, Jews remember this event on the feast of Purim, or Purim, P-U-R-I-M. And on that day, this story is read as a reminder that while some things may not change, God doesn't change either. And God is always mindful of his people. God is always working for the good of his people, no matter how bad the situation is. So maybe if criticism comes your way, accept it. It might not all be bad. If people are not nice to you, if people don't give you everything that you think you deserve, learn to live with it and let it go. Because ultimately, God will always provide what you need when you need it, even if it's not what you think you need or the time that you need it. Again, go back to the book of Esther, read through it, spend time with the discussion questions. They'll scroll here at the end, and you'll see those. You can pause the video if you need to write them down. They'll be there if you want to go back and watch a little bit later. But always know, Wednesdays, it's good to be in the Word. Thanks for stopping by.